Hey, something's going on. It's not good.
Air traffic controllers in California face a catastrophe.
The radar controller said something like,
Hughes Air West 706, radio check. How do you hear me?
no answer.
A passenger plane with 49 people on board vanishes from radar.
What happened? Was it a structural issue? It had crashed for some reason and we had no idea whatsoever.
Witnesses describe an almost unthinkable scenario.
Was that something there?
We didn't see it. 4 sets of eyes didn't see it.
We might have been a plane, or maybe not.
The fact that somebody says something doesn't prove anything until you've proved it yourself.
What the hell were those guys doing up there?
Los Angeles International Airport. Hughes Air West Flight 706 prepares for takeoff. There are 44 passengers on board. Their flight is a city hopper with stops in Utah, Idaho, and Washington State.
Welcome aboard, folks. We'll be getting underway
Any minute now.
Captain Theodore Nikolai is in command today.
Captain Nikolai had flown for the Air Force. He was pretty senior, so anybody who was flying with him felt comfortable because of his seniority and he knew what he was doing.
Los Angeles International is one of the busiest hubs in North America. Controllers direct crews to follow specific air corridors on departure.
Air West 706 Red, cleared for takeoff, runway 24 left. Climb via heading 250.
Roger, 24 left, climb heading 250.
First Officer Price Bruner is also highly experienced.
Weather's looking clear all the way to Seattle.
He has even more hours in the air than Captain Nikolai.
Price was actually checked out as a captain, although he elected to fly as first officer, and I think he truly enjoyed being in the cockpit.
Flight attendant Pat Shelton flies this route regularly.
She was a beautiful gal with lots of long, dark hair, and she had just gotten engaged. She was so looking forward to getting married, and she was at a happy state in her life.
Runway's clear.
Brakes released.
In 1971, airlines in the US have been flying the DC-9 for more than 5 years. Its 2 efficient turbofan engines make it ideal for short to medium-haul flights.
Throttles are all yours.
80 knots.
At 6:02 p.m., the Hughes Air West flight lifts off from LA.
Turn right, heading 060.
Air West 706 Red, right 060.
The heading takes the plane west over the Pacific Ocean before turning northeast towards its first stop, Salt Lake City. 4 minutes after takeoff, First Officer Bruner contacts a different control center north of LA.
Los Angeles Center, good evening. Air West 706 Red with you.
Climbing through 6,000.
The Los Angeles Air Route Traffic Control Center.
Air West 706 Red, turn left.
Heading 040 until receiving Daggett.
Head controller Roger Anderson is helping a trainee operator get up to speed.
That's it. You got to keep scanning.
It's something where you can't stop and think about each decision in depth. You have to make quick decisions, a lot of reaction. You got to move at a fast pace.
Controllers must keep planes at a safe distance from one another as they fly in and out of LA.
In addition to Air West, the radar controller may have been talking to 5 or 6 other jets climbing out towards the northeast, in addition to a small number of crisscrossers back and forth through the airspace.
Okay, 040, direct to Daggett.
The controllers monitor the Hughes Air West DC-9 on radar. They use markers called shrimp boats to track the position of every plane.
Shrimp boats, this was before automation, and these were little small plastic markers with a pointy end, and we'd write on them with a grease pencil, and it would contain just basic information like aircraft call sign, sometimes the assigned altitudes, as much information as you can squeeze with a grease pencil onto a little plastic marker.
The sound of an emergency transmitter warns the controllers that a plane in the area may be in trouble. They need more information to figure out what's happening.
Frequently at the time, people would accidentally trigger the transmitter. It was seldom a real situation, so we didn't tend to pay that much attention to it. At this point, we look back, and our shrimp boats, where Air West 706 is, the target's missing. The radar controller said something like,
Hughes Air West 706, reset your transponder. Radar contact lost.
There's no answer. Air West 706.
Radio check, how do you hear me?
No answer. This is getting bad now. We've lost a target, and we've got no communications with the aircraft.
Anderson realizes the enormity of the situation when the crew of a nearby military plane radios in.
Center, we've just seen an explosion on the side of a mountain.
Hey, something's going on. It's not good.
And he said, Center, I didn't see it, but my co-pilot looked out the window. He saw explosions on the side of the mountain. Well, then, we knew something bad had happened.
What the hell happened?
A DC-9 with 49 people on board has slammed into the California hills.
Did Air West just explode? Did a wing fall off? What happened? Was it a structural issue? It had crashed for some reason, and we had no idea whatsoever.
The loss of the DC-9 will attract a lot of attention because of its high-profile owner. Just a year earlier, the airline was purchased by billionaire aviator Howard Hughes, one of the most famous people in America.
Howard Hughes was looking for an airline to buy at a good price, and eventually they found Air West. It then became Hughes Air West.
The National Transportation Safety Board assigns one of its top investigators to the case, Second World War Navy pilot Dick Baker.
San Gabriel Mountains.
The crash location poses an immediate challenge.
Okay. We're gonna need choppers to get in there. In the meantime, I want you to find me anyone who saw anything. Now.
In this case, the accident site was very remote and in very precipitous mountain terrain. That makes it always difficult for the investigators to get out there.
The crash site is just a few kilometers from the town of Duarte, California. It's the best place to find witnesses. In the hours after the crash, dozens of people come forward with the same story. They say they heard an explosion and looked up to see the DC-9 falling like a leaf to the ground. Most have no idea what caused the explosion, but a handful of witnesses say they do. They insist it was a mid-air collision between the DC-9 and a fighter jet.
Witness statements can be notoriously deceiving, but in a mid-air collision, they're generally pretty accurate as to the fact that a collision occurred.
Investigators need to figure out where this second jet may have come from. With the American war in Vietnam raging, military air bases on the West Coast are extremely active. There are several in Southern California alone.
In the 70s, there was lots of military training going on in Southern California because there were clear skies and lots of desert out there that they could train over.
Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.
Baker soon gets the information he needs.
El Toro's missing a jet.
An F-4 Phantom hasn't made it back to nearby El Toro Marine Corps Air Base. It's the military's most advanced fighter. The two-man jet is capable of flying at twice the speed of sound and outmaneuvering almost everything else in the sky.
It was simply the meanest aircraft on the block. It had a radar missile capability, so you could shoot BVR beyond visual range. It was high speed, more than Mach 2 capable.
The witness reports leave little doubt. The missing fighter from El Toro is the aircraft that collided with the DC-9. But how could experienced fighter pilots fly into a much slower civilian plane?
What the hell were those guys doing up there?
Witnesses provide some crucial information about a mid-air collision in the skies over Southern California.
Dick Baker, NTSB.
Several people share a particularly troubling detail.
I want you to tell me again what you mean by trick flying.
It seems the fighter jet may have been performing a stunt moments before it collided with the passenger plane.
The jet was doing a barrel roll.
Stunt flying is dangerous, not only for pilots, but also for people on the ground. It's strictly regulated.
If he was performing acrobatic maneuvers in an area that was not specifically assigned for acrobatic maneuvers, it would be in violation of his operating instructions for any military flying.
Investigators hope recordings of air traffic radar will tell them more about what the F-4 pilots were doing. But the controllers on duty that day say the fighter didn't appear on their radar at all.
I would have warned Hughes if I'd seen the jet.
And they have the tapes to prove it.
We didn't see it. 4 sets of eyes didn't see it. The target wasn't there. What you don't know, you can do nothing about.
Investigators learn the identities of the F-4's 2 crewmen, Marine pilot James Richard Phillips and radar intercept officer Christopher Schiess. After the impact, only Lieutenant Schiess was able to eject from the doomed fighter.
There's a time that you know you have to get out of the aircraft. There's no more fooling around.
Investigators are anxious to learn what Schiess knows. But first, doctors must check him for injuries.
I would think if the other crew member did not survive, you'd feel horrible because you were a survivor. It's something that you made it, and the guy sitting just a few feet away from you did not.
In Vietnam-era America, the involvement of a military jet in a civilian disaster sparks a public outcry.
It was in an era of our nation's history that the military wasn't the most popular organization in the world. And so it does create greater tension in the investigation.
The Marines send their own man to help with the investigation.
Dick Baker.
Lieutenant Colonel Jack Zig.
Guess we'll be working together on this.
He'll work with the NTSB to figure out how the 2 planes collided.
These were good Marines. I doubt they were stunting.
Well, let's figure that out.
The wreckage may offer some clues about what happened, but recovering it from the remote crash site in the San Gabriel Mountains will take time.
The rough terrain and dense fog have hampered the removal of bodies and the search for clues.
It is very rough terrain, bramble bushes, rattlesnakes, and very steep canyons. This area was some of the roughest terrain that I had ever seen or experienced.
The first rescue workers had to hike 6 miles to get to the scene. They reported only the tail section intact, no signs of life.
Among the wreckage are the remains of 49 men, women, and children, the youngest just 3 weeks old.
There is a porthole adjacent to the forward jump seat. And I'm just imagining that Pat Shelton would have been looking out through that porthole. I'm just wondering if they weren't able to see a split second of something. That haunts me often.
This was the worst plane crash in California history.
In an area swarming with military flights, the deadly collision sends a chill through the flying public.
We were very concerned about the mid-air collision.
Investigators need to figure out what went wrong before it happens again. A day after the crash, they get a chance to talk to the accident's sole survivor.
Thanks, John. You send him in.
They're eager to ask him to explain the maneuvers reported by the witnesses.
There's a tremendous urgency to talk to any survivor of an accident, to get to them as quickly as possible, because they tend to build on news stories, so you don't get the clear, unfiltered description.
Sit down, Lieutenant.
We won't bite.
What were you doing? Who, what, when, where, and why?
Lieutenant Christopher Schiess is just 24 years old. He insists that he and his pilot were not stunting. He maintains the collision was not their fault at all.
The DC-9 hit us. Like this. His nose to our tail.
Hold on, back up a bit. Tell me exactly what happened.
On the day of the crash, Schiess was flying in the rear seat of the F-4, the usual position for the Radar Intercept Officer, or RIO.
Copy, Rick. Climb to 15,000.
27-year-old First Lieutenant Rick Phillips is in the forward seat, flying the jet. The pair have already flown across 4 states. Their mission now is to get the F-4 back to home base, El Toro, California.
Climbed to 15,000 feet. Here. And we rolled over for a look around.
An aileron roll?
Yes, sir. Full 360.
Schiess claims they executed a 360-degree aileron roll. They wanted to check for other planes flying above or below their jet.
The F-4 Phantom had good visibility down over the nose, and anytime you wanted to look anywhere, it would just take a second to roll so that an area in which you didn't have good visibility, you could instantaneously get good visibility.
After the roll, Schiess uses his radar to scan the ground below. Part of his combat training.
It's excellent practice for ingress either at night or in the weather, such that you could fly and use the radar to know where you were over the ground. He would have his head down in the radar scope doing ground mapping, and then the front seater would be primarily visual because he knew that he lost that extra set of eyes that was down in the radar instead of looking out for other aircraft in the C and B scene environment.
That's when I first saw the DC-9. Came out of nowhere and slammed into us.
5 seconds later, Schiess ejects.
I got out. Rick didn't.
The radar observer who had bailed out, one of his first comments was that the DC-9 had hit them, so this kind of became an objective. Did the DC-9 hit the F-4? Did the F-4 hit the DC-9?
Investigators know the F-4 was not equipped with a black box. They'll have no flight data from the fighter to help confirm Schiess's story. They won't get any clues from the Phantom's wreckage either. The high-speed impact obliterated the small jet. Hughes Air West engineer Dave Knutson is brought in to see if the young lieutenant's story holds up.
Not unlike an intersection on the ground, generally speaking, the one who gets the intersection first,
climbing through 15,000 feet,
tends to have the right-of-way. So that seemed to be kind of an overwhelming drive to determine that.
Wreckage from the DC-9 might explain which pilot was at fault.
The task began to find a place where we could rebuild the airplane. In this particular case, it was a factory where they had put fiberglass together. For whatever reason, they left hundreds of C-clamps.
These could be handy.
Plus there were overhead cranes, which was ideal for reconstructing the airplane.
Knutson hopes putting the DC-9 back together will help him understand exactly how the two planes hit.
We knew that there was a mid-air collision up there. The objective was to the extent possible, to rebuild the remains of the airplane to help in the investigation as to what actually happened up there.
The team has recovered the DC-9's black boxes, but they're badly damaged.
We'll have to see if the lab can do anything with these.
They're sent to NTSB headquarters in Washington for analysis. Knutson studies the twisted metal, looking for scratches and paint marks, clues that might reveal how the two planes hit. But the most vital piece of the DC-9 is still missing.
We had recovered the main section, which was in this canyon, along with all the remains, but we still were missing the front end of the cockpit area.
How to find the rest of it?
In Washington, the lab is also having mixed success. The DC-9's cockpit voice recorder is completely destroyed, but the flight data recorder has survived the crash.
The flight data recorder in this case gave very good information.
If the pilots of the DC-9 had somehow flown off course,
right, 060,
the flight data recorder should reveal their mistake.
The aircraft did little in the way of maneuvering. The aircraft was in a steady state climb.
Instead, the data shows they never strayed from their assigned heading. 10 days after the crash, searchers finally find the nose of the DC-9 nearly a kilometer from the main fuselage. It's a key discovery for Knutson.
After we had started rebuilding the plane, questions arose about what angle were the airplanes going when they collided. And so one of my job as an engineer was to get various pieces of the airplane and determine what the angle of attack was, so to speak.
Bingo.
There's only one way to explain the size and angle of the gash slicing through the cockpit.
Looks like the stabilizer cut the plane in two.
Once we got the plane constructed, you could back off and you could see where the vertical stabilizer of the fighter came right underneath the pilot's seat and just sliced off the nose.
So if they hit like this,
the F4 had actually penetrated the DC-9 on the left side a few feet from the nose. So frankly, F4 hit the DC-9 rather than the DC-9 hitting the F4.
And we know who hit who.
The markings suggest the F4 tried to avoid the DC-9 at the last second.
Cut off the nose of the airplane. And that took away all the controls in the airplane, as some of the observers on the ground said. It was like a falling leaf until it hit the ground.
Investigators are convinced Lieutenant Schiess is wrong about who hit whom. More troubling, it's not the only part of his story that doesn't add up.
He says they hit 15,000 feet here.
The witnesses say that they saw them roll here.
Witnesses contradict Schiess's story about where the F4 was when it performed the roll.
The investigator brings a very cynical approach to anything that he's investigating. The fact that somebody says something doesn't prove anything until you've proved it yourself.
You can't be in two places at the same time.
Some witnesses insist that a Marine F4 was performing stunts just before it crashed into the Hughes Air West DC-9.
It's okay. Was it like this? No. Okay. How about this?
There was some conflict between what we had gotten from eyewitnesses, or supposedly eyewitnesses, along the flight path, and what the Rio was describing.
And we rolled over for a look around.
Lieutenant Schiess claims the move wasn't a stunt.
An aileron roll?
He says it was a safe, standard maneuver called an aileron roll.
Yes, sir. Full 360.
I could best describe that as simply flying in a level, upright position and placing the stick either to the left or to the right, and the aircraft rolls about the longitudinal axis.
During an aileron roll, the jet flies in a straight line at a constant speed. But during a barrel roll, loops are added, so the jet covers less ground in the same length of time. Investigators should be able to figure out which maneuver it was by reconstructing the F-4's flight path.
We actually flew the route of the flight and were able to duplicate the aircraft's progress along the flight path.
Lieutenant Schiess's recollection of the flight.
And she says that they were here 2 minutes before the crash.
Is combined with witness sightings of the plane.
And an eyewitness who checked his watch says he saw the plane here 1 minute before the crash. That looks like a straight run to me.
From the ground, it would have been easy to mistake one maneuver for the other.
There was no indication that he was what you would classify as a hot dog or undisciplined in his activities. I'm sure that they were more interested in getting home than they were in, oh boy, I've got an airplane and an hour to kill and watch this, or something of that nature.
But something still doesn't add up. The F-4 is an incredibly nimble aircraft. It can turn much more sharply than any commercial airliner.
For the F-4, minimum cruising around airspeeds were in the neighborhood of a minimum of 300 knots, and that would enable us to at least do an initial 5G turn if an airliner popped up in front of you.
If the F-4 wasn't stunting, why couldn't it avoid the much larger and less nimble DC-9 in its path? Investigators study the basics. The weather.
It was what I would classify as a typical Southern California day. There were no obstructions to visibility.
We're missing something. We need Schiess back here.
I don't believe that the initial descriptions by the Rio of his flight path and what activity had taken place was in any way in error because of deliberate action on his part. I think he was very much in shock as a function of the event he had been through.
Okay, Lieutenant, let's go back to the very beginning. What were you doing before the flight?
Before the flight, we were at the base in Fallon, getting the F-4 looked over.
On the afternoon of June the 6th, the young officer is 600 kilometers from Los Angeles at an airbase in Nevada. His F-4 Phantom is one of a group of fighters that's been practicing air intercepts over the western United States.
They were en route from Fallon Naval Air Station up in Nevada back to Marine El Toro in the South Los Angeles basin, relatively close to LAX.
Just needed some guidance with an oxygen issue and we were good to go.
Oxygen issue?
Investigators learned the F-4's high-altitude oxygen system was leaking.
So there's no way to fix it at this base?
Mechanics in Nevada couldn't fix it.
Sir, it's Lieutenant Schiess. Yes, sir. Will do. Yeah, they still want us to head back to El Toro.
To avoid using the broken oxygen system,
just keep it nice and low.
They've been ordered to fly at low altitude.
And that's what we did.
At 5:15 p.m., the F-4 takes off. Pilot Rick Phillips cruises lower than he ordinarily would. If it hadn't been for the oxygen problem, he could have flown much higher and clear of commercial traffic leaving Los Angeles. At around 6 p.m., the pilot needs to climb to avoid the mountains ahead and get above a layer of haze.
Copy, Rick. Climb to 15,000.
The crew in the F-4, they climbed from, I believe it was about 1,500 to 15,000 feet. You could certainly do climb rates of 10 to 15,000 feet a minute easily in a Phantom.
Baker wonders if the rapid increase in altitude could have brought on a dangerous condition known as hypoxia.
Hypoxia will degrade your visual acuity.
It's a deprivation of oxygen to the brain. It slows down your thinking, and that's not good in a tactical high-speed aircraft.
Marine Corps investigators,
the system is for the masks,
are familiar with the F-4's design.
And this one here is for the cabin pressure.
They know that the problem with the oxygen system would have only affected the masks. And those are only required at very high altitudes. At 15,000 feet, there should have been plenty of oxygen in the cockpit.
The pressurization system of the aircraft would have held the cabin altitude well below 10,000 feet. So there was no requirement for the oxygen from a standpoint of physiology. The crew was not hypoxic in any way, shape, or form.
The cause of the collision remains a mystery. There's a basic concept in aviation called see and avoid. It's every pilot's job to watch out for other planes. Investigators wonder why the pilots of the DC-9 did not take any action to avoid the disaster.
Not much here. You got anything?
Investigators find that commercial pilots don't get as much training as their military counterparts when it comes to visual scanning.
Engage autopilot.
There was no formal training at Air West with respect to see and avoid scanning. The crew may have had some residual training from past military experience, but Hughes Air West did not have an established program.
Too bad you're missing Dodge's game tonight.
This year, they're going all the way to the World Series.
Not if the Giants can keep it up.
I don't think that the average crew member in the airlines was aware of how significant outside scanning was or should be. We had studies, pilots would spend less than 50% of their time looking outside, and sometimes as low as 20%.
The investigators conclude that the Hughes Air West pilots may not have had enough training to scan effectively, and that's why they failed to spot the F-4. Not everyone is convinced. Many of his colleagues remember Captain Nikolai as an exceptionally vigilant pilot.
Captain Nikolai was that kind of a pilot, I think, who really had an instinct with flying. On one occasion, we had a near miss, and he took the airplane for a dive. And I can remember him explaining to his first officer and to whoever was in the vicinity about how important it is to keep your eyes out because anything could come along.
If Captain Nikolai was on the lookout for planes in his path, why didn't he see the approaching F-4?
The F-4 is coming in at 420 knots from the north, slightly east. DC-9 is coming in at 320 knots from the southwest.
Okay, 040, direct to Daggett.
What's the rate of closure?
I was able to calculate the closing speed of these two planes was roughly 1,000 feet per second. And if one thinks about that, and a good comparison is the muzzle velocity of a .45 caliber gun.
In the seconds before the crash, radar operator Schiess has his head down checking his scope. Pilot Phillips is likely checking instruments.
At 15 seconds, the F-4 is 1/10 of an inch big in the window. Tiny. 10 seconds, 3/10 of an inch. Still tiny, but maybe now we can see it. 5 seconds, the entire window's filled.
In addition to the rapid closing speed, the color of the fighter may have also been a factor.
It would be very difficult in the accident context for the airline guys to spot the F-4 because it was painted Marine/Navy gray-blue, which would be very hard to see against the sky, which in fact is the objective.
The probability of these two aircraft, either one, detecting and avoiding the other was slim and none.
Investigators suspect the design of the DC-9 cockpit, with its wide window dividers, may have made the visibility problem even worse.
You can't see it here. Or here.
The F-4 would have been hidden.
Or here.
By the window posts.
It's completely obstructed.
For close to 25 seconds.
It's virtually impossible for the DC-9 crew to have detected the F-4 as it approached.
Just another hazy day.
None of the pilots that day had enough time to see the other plane in their path. But air traffic controllers are supposed to make sure planes fly at a safe distance from each other and prevent collisions in the sky.
Air West 706 Red, turn left, heading 040 until receiving Daggett.
But they didn't see the F-4 either.
Why did the F-4, the Marine aircraft, not show up on the radar? The fact that the DC-9 was under radar control at the time raised many questions about why did they not give warning or a traffic alert to the DC-9, which was their primary responsibility of the air traffic controllers.
Couple rookies in there.
Investigators wonder if the inexperience of the trainee controllers could have played a role.
A new person training in an air traffic control facility has to train with live traffic. Now there's a lot of simulation equipment available for training, but back then we had none of that.
But when they study staff reports and transcripts,
they all check out.
They find the trainees were well qualified and well supervised.
The two trainees, you can say, well, they were trainees. What do they know? They probably weren't paying attention. Wrong. Trainees are paying attention much more closely than a journeyman controller, who can tend to get a tad complacent because they're so comfortable with the routine.
There appears to be no way to explain why the radar system in Palmdale didn't detect the F-4. Then investigators discover some key details about the equipment installed there. The system may not have been reliable enough to accurately track a fast-moving fighter jet.
It was nothing more than World War II technology, and temperatures generated by this equipment would cause the equipment to drift drastically, and sometimes it would drift so bad off its peak performance that we really couldn't see at all.
Investigators need to know exactly what the radar in Palmdale can and cannot see. Investigators conduct a radar test. They fly an F-4 along the route Sheese and Phillips took to see whether it can be picked up by radar in Palmdale.
Oh, was that something there?
The F-4 is traveling almost 500 miles an hour.
The F-4 does 6 runs. The controller can barely track the fast, stealthy fighter.
It might have been a plane, or maybe not.
It could just be interference that was shown frequently on the radar, ground clutter, who knows what. A single blip means absolutely nothing. We have to have a history of blips to see that it's actually traffic.
They conclude it would have been almost impossible to detect the Marine F-4 as it streaked across the sky.
He's all alone, and no one knows he's there.
To make matters worse, in 1971, military pilots were not routinely briefed on civilian air traffic routes.
The military pilots were not that familiar with what the civilian pilots were doing, not just the Los Angeles area, but in other heavy congested areas.
The military plane was under no obligation to check in with civilian air traffic control.
These are the roads in and out of LAX.
The air corridors surrounding LAX are like spokes on a wheel that extend for miles. Flight 706 was following one of those established corridors.
Well, your guys were crossing one of the busiest flight paths in the country. I assume they knew it was there?
We should stay clear of traffic if we cut east of Los Angeles.
Sheese tells investigators that they hope to avoid commercial air traffic by skirting the city. Instead, they turned into one of the airport's busiest lanes.
The terminal area charts would show those departures, but the military doesn't have those because they don't operate out of Los Angeles International Airport.
The question I have in my mind is, why did the F4 crew, why did they not get a hold of an air traffic control guy to let them know where they were and what they were doing?
The investigators reach an alarming conclusion. Air transportation in America has a dangerous flaw. The military and civilian systems don't communicate.
Could we have done anything different? No, absolutely not. It was just something that happened. We could not have changed it, not us.
The exhaustive investigation produces two separate reports, one civilian and one military. They cover every detail of the deadly accident. How two Marine airmen were hindered by an oxygen leak.
So there's no way to fix it at this base.
How they took off without advising civilian air traffic controllers and flew low over the California desert.
Was that something there?
How controllers couldn't track the supersonic fighter jet, and why the crew of a DC-9 with 44 passengers on board never saw them coming.
Just another hazy day.
The reports lead to important changes in the rules governing aviation.
Military pilots used to fly VFR, visual flight rules, which has a much lesser requirement for reporting positions and that sort of thing. And so, as a result of this accident, everybody had to be on radar control, and that means being controlled by radar operators on the ground.
Military pilots are now advised of all restricted air traffic zones near commercial airports. The size and shape of the zones has also changed.
There was a continuum of revision to restricted airspace into what we call the upside-down wedding cake.
No longer merely spokes from a hub, restricted airspace at busy airports now surrounds the entire terminal. Hughes Air West was sold in 1980 and eventually folded into Northwest Airlines. But the legacy of the airline's deadliest accident endures. Lessons learned from the accident helped force changes to air traffic control that make passengers safer to this day.
It was so unfortunate the 50 people died that evening. It's so sad. But this past year in the U.S., 35,000 were killed in traffic deaths. So the system is extremely safe. The procedures we use, the technology we have, it works well.
Air Crash Investigation is back after the break when aviation experts turn to an ingenious experiment to uncover the full explanation for a plane's icy end.